Hey Enviro students, hope you guys are doing well today. Mr. Harmson and I are missing all of you terribly. Normally in our Enviro class, when we go into groundwater and aquifers, we usually use a lot of models within the classroom to show you guys how aquifers work. So we tried to do that doing those simulations from last week. Hopefully you guys saw how the wells work. If you didn't, we'll post those videos up on Schoology just in case you need some review on how those wells were drowning or pulling up the water from the ground and what they were doing to the groundwater supply. I'm going to show you guys how you can make a little aquifer demo at home so you can see how the wells affect the water level and then show you guys how groundwater pollution occurs. So if you would like to do this with me, I highly encourage it. It doesn't really require anything special, just a few supplies from your house. So you're going to need one clear glass. You have it, 1 or 2 straws. If you have rocks, gravel, or aquarium gravel, you could use those. I'm going to use food. That way I can suck up through the straw. I've got almonds here and pumpkin seeds. These don't float, so they can represent my ground layers. So if you guys want to pause the video, you can go grab the supplies and do this along with me. You can also watch me go through it. I think it really helps if you do it yourself because then you can actually see what happens with the water level a little more clearly than in this video. So I'm going to stop myself for a minute and let you guys grab the stuff if you would like it. Oh, forgot one supply. You also need water that has some food coloring in it so you can see the water level. All right. See you guys back here in a minute. Back here with you, and I've got my different forms of gravel. So I'm going to fill my cup, maybe a third or halfway. I've got whole and slivered almonds in there. And then I'm going to open up my pumpkin seeds. Take a good handful. Just kind of load those up on top. And then I'm going to take my ground, shake up a little bit just so I have a little bit more of a mix and variety of soil sizes together there. All right, so this is going to represent our soil. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a couple of wells. So I have a really short Charlie straw and then mommy straw. So I'm going to dig this one as far down as I can go. Kind of secure it with some almonds there. And then I'm going to put my second straw a little more shallow. Okay, so you guys can see this one is here, and then this one goes all the way down to the bottom of my cup. And then I'm going to take my water. I dyed this red so you guys can see it, and I'm just going to pour it down into my cup, about fill it up halfway with the gravel level. So you guys can see that red really nicely. That right there is going to be my aquifer. Okay, so that's an aquifer in a cup. All right, I'm going to take some markers and show you guys where the unsaturated zone, saturated zone, and the water table are. So I'm going to pause this for another second. When I come back, I'll show you guys. I'm back, and I've got my 2 zones marked. I'm going to show you guys this with just the red dye and also show you with the 2 colors. I think it's kind of hard to see with the markers, but you guys can see right here, that's where my water is at its peak. So then I have everything from here down is water, and then everything from here up slightly wet, but not completely soaked with water. So just to review, this boundary point, so that's the line between where you have it soaked with water and not soaked with water. I hope you guys remember what that's called. Think about it. Think about it. That would be called your water table. So that top boundary of the aquifer, the unconfined aquifer, that would be your water table. So that's where it's saturated. That's the top point of saturation. Everything down is called your saturation zone. So that means that this is completely soaked with water. As we move up, that is known as the unsaturated zone. That area, it doesn't mean that it's completely dry. It just means that it's not completely soaked with water. All right, so I don't know if you guys can see this, but hopefully right here it's marked blue, saturated zone, And then from here on up is green, and that would be your unsaturated zone. Now let's take a look at our wells. Okay, so we have this one. This one is our shallow well. Typically, shallow wells are going to be drilled by individual residents or households. So these go down just enough really to get a decent water supply for the home. They don't need usually as much. And let's say this deeper one is actually a city well. So these guys are pumping out for the entire town. Okay, so, these guys, they just have to worry about a few people, whereas this one, could be giving water to up to millions of people, depending on the size of the town. So if I start pumping out my water, as you guys can see, there's still some water here down at the bottom. So this large well is still able to access water at the level of the water table, but the shallow well, as you guys can hear, has no access to the water because the water table has been moved from this point up here all the way down to here. And that can happen when you have large wells drilled down. Sometimes these private residences lose access to their water supply because their wells just aren't drilled deep enough. So that's one of the issues that can occur with groundwater. I'm going to set up another demo to show you guys how surface pollution can get into the groundwater. Meet you guys back here in a minute. Hey guys, I'm back. Second demo. You guys can see I'm using the same cup with the same soil, still got my 2 wells drilled in here. The only difference is I've switched out my red water for clear water. I also drained the water out of here, rinsed it a couple of times. The reason I did that is I'm going to be adding Christmas sparkles to my model here so I can show you guys what happens when you have surface pollution get down into your groundwater. This is specifically an example with an unconfined aquifer or an aquifer that doesn't have that impermeable boundary. So I reduce my water table a little here. All right, so right now my water table is right about here. I'm going to take my red sprinkles and I'm going to put a good chunk of them right up on the top here. So you guys can see there's that little red patch of sprinkles. This is going to represent precipitation. Could be rain, could be snow, could be ice melting. So as long as it's just a form of precipitation, and then we've got our ground here. So this is going to be a surface. I'm going to put my finger back on where our water table was. And I'm going to just put a little bit of rain down in there. So you guys can see right here, some of the sprinkles have gotten down. They're not quite in the water table yet. A little bit more rain. Now I've got red sparkles. Hopefully you guys can see here. There's red sparkles moving all the way down into my aquifer. So those unconfined aquifers are open. You just have that saturated zone. And when you get infiltration from precipitation or water permeating through the soil, you can see most of the pollution is located up at the top still. It hasn't completely, weird angle here, hasn't completely permeated through. Most of it's still located up there, but those small little spaces between the soil eventually get packed full of pollution. And then once it gets into the bottom, let me show you what can happen with your wells. Hopefully you guys see my water isn't clear anymore. It's red. So that's what happens with groundwater contamination. If the pollution is able to penetrate or soak down through all the soil layers, you're going to get hopefully a minimal amount of contamination down there. But it is possible that you're going to get pollutants in your drinking water supply if you are dependent on groundwater. If we were in school, we would have you guys actually do a really big lab called Fruitvale, where we have 40 little wells, little containers where you actually would test the well, and we would ask you guys to find the source of the pollution. Like, this is how the water in Fruitvale gets polluted. There's a source of contamination that through permeation or through infiltration is able to permeate through the soil, and it actually pollutes the entire groundwater source for the town, and it flows from the upper section, or the upper part of the watershed, all the way down throughout the watershed and the drinking water of the town, which is actually located quite far south of it. Hey guys, just to review, this is the rural area and urban area well models that you guys were supposed to look at last Friday. So as you guys can see, I've got the rural area with 2 wells right now. And if you just look at the rural area, you guys can see that the water from the surface is able to penetrate down. The water table drops where you see the 2 wells, because that water is getting pumped to the surface and used, but it's able to recharge that aquifer because the water from the surface is able to penetrate down and keep recharging. So again, your recharge rate is just how long it takes for the water to permeate back down into those aquifers. I'm going to stop this for a second and set up the urban side and show you guys that difference. As you guys can see on this model, I put 2 wells in the urban zone. Now the water that is pouring or falling into the urban area, that water is not permeating down. That's because you have a lot of impermeable surfaces like roads and cement. So a lot of that gets run off into local streams. In your area, all of the water that rains down generally gets put down into the sewer system when it runs off from the streets or the sidewalks, and that water goes down into what we call the stormwater system, and that stormwater generally flows out either straight into the Skokie River or into Lake Michigan. As you guys can see in this urban system, there are 2 wells, just like there were in the rural. There would actually be more wells because there's a much larger population in urban areas than rural areas. You guys can see that the water from the city is being run off into a permeable area that's just outside the city. And then the water that gets into that permeable area is recharging the aquifer, but it is recharging at a much slower rate than what we saw in the rural area because there's just not enough water getting through that concrete and asphalt that is covering over the city. So the water supply for the city is going to go down a lot faster. So you have 2 main factors that cause that: the impermeable surfaces that don't allow the water level to recharge, and then you also have a much larger population that's using a lot more water. So that's why we also have flooding in cities, because the water isn't absorbed by the ground naturally. It's got to run off, and usually, as I said, it's going to run off into the sewer system, and those sewer systems generally go directly into waterways. If your sewer systems can't keep up with the capacity of rain, which we've seen several times over the last couple of years with some severe flooding around the Des Plaines River, around the Skokie River, and even Lake Michigan levels coming up, this is what's causing it. As you guys can see, those impermeable surfaces play a big role in not just your recharge rate, but where your water is going. All right, so last thing I want to show you today. Hopefully some of you guys are familiar with this. This says Brita right across the side here. This is a Brita filter, so it's one of the ones that you stick inside of a container, and then you put your water inside of that container, and then throw it in the fridge or on the counter. And this is a carbon filter that purifies your water. This is the same thing as this, except this goes in my Keurig. So it's just a smaller version, and it's for your coffee maker. I cut my little coffee filter open because I wanted to show you guys what's inside of this. So see, I just slip open the bottom, and I'm going to pour some of this stuff out. You guys can see it's kind of filled with this black granular stuff. In the picture, you guys can see there's a bunch of little black grains. Those black grains are actually carbon, or activated charcoal might be a term you're more familiar with. That activated charcoal or carbon actually collects the impurities in the water and filters out. It can be anything from hazardous chemicals to bad odors, bacteria in the water that you're drinking. When we were at the water plant walking through the main part of the plant and we were watching the water being filtered through those large screens and saw the sediments being settled out, through part of that phase, they were actually shifting. Through part of that tour, they were actually showing us an area where they were filtering the water through large carbon filters. The smaller versions are just ones that you can use at home. So this is a way to make sure that you're cleaning the impurities out of your water. Now for you guys, you're drinking Lake Michigan water. You saw the process. It is very well filtered and cleaned. It's probably safe coming straight from your tap, and they're testing it regularly to make sure that it is safe to drink. Where I live out on the chain of lakes, some homes have access to Lake Michigan drinking water. Where I live, I actually have my own well. So in my house, in order to just ensure that we're taking that extra step to get good, clean filtered water, we have a Brita filter that we keep in our fridge, and we just pour our water through. It's just one extra step to make sure that we're getting nice, clean drinking water. All right, guys, that's it. I hope you enjoyed learning with me today and that you guys are safe and well. Talk to you soon. Bye.